Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I'm Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. We're going to stretch a bit today. Our subject is faith, politics, and the future of Zionism in America. And our guest is Ken Timmerman, author, analyst, and self-acknowledged Christian Zionist. You know where this is going. Antisemitism and the right of American political spectrum is in the headlines today. And I have to say, though, that I think that's a good thing. Because where the Democrats hid theirs for a very long time, and it's beginning to pop out now, on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, we're taking it head on. And that's where we have to do. And Ken is going to help us do it. But first, your JPC introduction. I know you've heard it before. Hear it again. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization established in 1985, providing analysis of foreign and domestic policy by scholars and academics. The JPC supports strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And since October 7th, our most important job is to support the government of Israel and the IDF in their defense of the people and the borders of Israel, inside those borders and beyond those borders, ensuring that Hamas has neither military nor governing power in the Strip, and securing the release of the remaining hostages. And do not forget that there are 3 deceased hostages that remain in Hamas's hands, and they need to go home. We also support American support for Israel. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates domestically for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. You can read our publications on the JPC website, jewishpolicycenter.org. It's jewishpolicycenter.org. You can find our Insight articles, In Context blog, and In Focus Quarterly magazine. Right now, you can read the fall issue of In Focus Quarterly entitled Identity, Borders, and Conflict. You can imagine where that goes. And you'll also find our previous webinars, which are good for binge watching. Speaking of webinars that are good for binge watching, this one will be, and I am thrilled to have Ken Timmerman today as our guest. So I opened my review of his outstanding book, And the Rest is History, which was reviewed in the fall 2002 issue of In Focus, this way. Author and journalist Ken Timmerman was a lot of things as the book opens: left-wing, Francophile, living in France, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, secular, and not particularly interested in the United States. It was a lot to overcome. So then I read the book, and then Ken lived the rest of his life. In 1982, he was taken prisoner for 24 days by Fatah guerrillas in Lebanon, something he will tell you changed his life, and he will tell you how. He was also the first American journalist on the scene when Islamic terrorists bombed the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983. He covered the Iran-Iraq War and the arms industry in the Middle East, writing for a lot of specialized publications and, regular publications about Iraq, Syria, and Libya, and their efforts to acquire weapons of mass destruction. In 1991, he published the enormously important book, The Death Lobby: How the West Armed Iraq. He interviewed arms merchants and government operatives to reveal how Western governments transformed Iraq into a regional superpower, and how they ignored warnings from Iraqi Americans about Saddam's true intentions in the region. And then we got into the Iraq War. But Iran has been actually the largest focus of Ken's investigative and journalistic skills, not only reporting on advances in Iran's nuclear technology up until June of last year, but also on the Iranian people and their desire to be rid of the Mullah regime. He is the founder of Foundation for Democracy in Iran, and he works with Iranian opposition expatriates to try to get rid of the mullahs. So far, it hasn't worked, but we're still hoping. And his latest book, Raising Olives in Provence, is great beach reading. And in November, you need great beach reading because it's getting cold and it's getting nasty. Raising Olives in Provence. Ken, I'm happy to have you with us. Would you start us off by talking about what's, I think, front and center for everybody right now, and that is Tucker Carlson and the sort of bizarre transformation he's had. You and Tucker go back a long way, right?
Right. Well, thanks for having me on, Shoshana. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be here with your audience. Yeah, I've known Tucker on and off for well over 20 years, not intimately, certainly, but not as a close friend. But we were like-minded colleagues. I met him, I think, the first time on CNN's Crossfire when I published my Jesse Jackson book in 2002. That was kind of fun. And later, Newsmax sent me to Israel to cover the Hezbollah war in 2006. I came back and I worked with NBC as well and interviewed. Tucker had me on his show at that time at MSNBC. Later on, we won a journalism award together from Accuracy in Media in 2011. And he was very welcoming to me at the Daily Caller, which he had set up in the meantime to do op-eds and the rest of it. I even got to know his dad, Ambassador Dick Carlson. He had a radio show in Bethesda, Maryland, and I went there many, many times on a show to talk about geopolitics in the Middle East. And by the way, the sound engineer was Buckley Carlson, his brother. So, we've known each other for quite some time. I've liked him. I've respected him. I thought he did great work at Fox News, and I thought he was doing really tremendous stuff in the beginning on his new YouTube show until something
Yes.
happened. And that something happened. We have seen the effects of that something happen. We've seen the symptoms. He's had a series of anti-Semites, rabid, frank anti-Semites, pro-Hitler people like this Nick Fuentes, this dumb kid, and he showcases him, doesn't ask him any questions, doesn't suggest that his ideas of or his notion of admiring Hitler is at all out of the mainstream or unacceptable. And Tucker himself, I discovered this recently, Tucker himself explained what happened. He gave an interview,
Yes.
TV interview to the Blaze a while ago, about a year and a half ago, I think. And he explained it this way. He said, I've had a profound experience which has changed me deeply. I was mauled by a demon in the middle of the night,
A demon.
a demon. And he left claw marks on me. And I woke up in the morning, there was blood in the bed. My wife was there, the four dogs, nobody had seen anything, but there were physical claw marks. They were visible on my body. And after that meeting with the demon, and he doesn't say, by the way, whether the demon left, that's another story. Many of us think that's what's going on right now, is that the demon never left. But he said, after that encounter with the demon, I was moved to go and read the Bible, which I hadn't done in ever done or whatever. So I went and got myself a Bible, but I made sure I didn't get one of those study Bibles. I didn't want to get a Bible with any commentary. I didn't want to read any of those Christian preachers. I don't have any respect for them. I just wanted to read the Bible. And he did what happens with many people who don't have any study guides or don't have any help as they're reading the Bible. He immediately took much of the Bible out of context and was able to read into some of the passages, in particular in the New Testament, these anti-Semitic tropes that have, by the way, have plagued especially the Protestant church for centuries. The Protestant church has been a hotbed of anti-Semitism under the Reformation, under Martin Luther, was just horribly anti-Semitic. And so Tucker read all that into it. Jews are Christ killers, and this is the original blood libel, and he started to repeat that kind of stuff on his show. By the way, the same as Candace Owens has been doing too. So I tend to think, well, first of all, I have a basic disagreement with that. He also said that don't read the Old Testament. The Old Testament's irrelevant. Jews don't count. The Bible's all about Christians. And there's actually a word for that, and it's called replacement theology. And it's a very dangerous thing. It is a very deceitful belief. It is this notion that somehow the Christians have replaced the Jews as God's chosen people. And those of us who are Christian believers and do study the Bible find this a heretical interpretation of God's word. I consider myself to be a dispensationalist, somebody who believes that God has a plan for the Jewish people. And he never gave up on his plan for the Jewish people. It's in Deuteronomy 7:6. You know, he says that he chose the Jewish people as his chosen people, as his treasured possession, and he was giving them the land, and he was giving it to them forever. Not a couple of hundred years, you know, not 1,000 years, but forever. Tucker seems to have placed that, forgotten about that. He seems also to have forgotten that Jesus was a rabbi, uh, and that Jesus comes right out of the Jewish tradition. And he constantly cites the law and the prophets to his disciples wherever he is preaching, constantly, without fail. What he did was summarize the Ten Commandments into two, so you can forget. You know, you might be forget you might be able to think that you can forget number seven, but you can't. Okay, but he summarizes them down into two commandments: love the Lord thy God with all thy might, with all thy heart, and all thy soul, and the second like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. And it's true that summarizes all the law and the prophets. And Tucker forgets all this. And he forgets all this because he just comes at the Bible through his own lenses.
I have to say here that this is a concept basically unknown to Jewish people because when we study the Bible,
Mm,
you don't just study the Bible. There's the Talmud and the Gemara and the Mishnah and the rabbis and Rashi, and
right.
you take them all together. So this concept that a person could just read the words in front of him
Mm.
and suddenly be an expert is inconceivable. But you're saying that's what happened. That
That's
he
what
read it and
happened.
he said, I get it, and I'm right.
Right. And this is by his own admission. And the bit about the demon was by his own admission as well, which is very troubling. He forgets a lot of things. What was Jesus doing on the Last Supper? He was
Passover
celebrating the
Seder.
Passover Seder. I mean, come on. And you say God did not have a plan for the Jews? He was, our whole, we do this in our communion. It is a reenactment of the Last Supper and of the Passover Seder. We believe as Christians that Judaism and Christianity are linked like this. There would be no Christians without Judaism. There would be no Christianity without Judaism, and it's our duty to study both so we understand. Because it's not really a separate to us. It's not really separate. Christianity is a continuation. Judaism 2.0, if you like. It's a continuation in many many ways. The first martyrs of the church, Saint Stephen, what was he doing when he was stoned? He was recounting the story of Moses and how the Hebrews were saved by God's mighty hand from Pharaoh. That's what he was doing. He was recounting, and he was the first Christian martyr, and he's reciting the Old Testament stories. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, this is very interesting and very useful because I think that our listenership is not all Jewish people. It's a lot of other people too. But I think this is a great way to move into a different kind. I want to set Tucker aside here. I'm tired of Tucker, okay? But I want to keep going where you're going.
Mm,
So you had a growth pattern here in your life, and I want to understand two things, if you don't mind.
mm,
Explaining how you went from being who you were before you were kidnapped to
mm.
being what you are now, which is a Christian Zionist, an American patriot, and we're going to talk about what both of those things mean. How did you get there? How did you move? Because one of the things we have to do
Mm.
eventually is talk about moving a lot of people who are being suckered by Tucker and Candace Owens and people like them and bring them back to where we want them to be, which is good Americans and good friends of Israel and Jewish people. Tell
Right,
us
but
your story.
I hope they don't have to do it my way. My
Please not.
my way was no fun. I tell that story in And the Rest is History. All right, this is the first of the Timmerman trilogy. Right. Before that, I wrote 12 books of nonfiction, investigative books about Saddam Hussein, about Iran, about other stuff. But these three books kind of, in a way, tell my story, but also the investigations that I did. And so I went to Beirut in 82 as a young reporter, left wing, left bank intellectual, anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, you name it, the whole nine yards. Letters of introduction from Palestinian, quote, ambassadors in Europe and whatever. So I get there in West Beirut and promptly get taken hostage by the Palestinians. And of course, at that point, I'm 28 years old. I don't understand a thing, completely befuddles me. And I'm thrown into a dark underground cell near the sports stadium in Beirut. and held for 24 days. And it was at one point we were visited by a American couple, very strange couple, a woman with long brown hair and a slightly older guy, and they seemed, in khaki, combat jackets, the kind that the reporters in Doomsbury used to wear, right? The safari jackets. And me and a French guy in the cell started to sing our national anthems through the Judas, which is this small little square that you can see. I took a picture of one recently in Budapest in the Terror Museum, which is the old.
Boy.
Right, it was what the Nazis used to interrogate their prisoners, and then later the communists used. So a Judas is a small opening that they put stuff through. So we sang through the Judas, whistled our national anthems, and they promptly looked away. I found out, by the way, that was Janet Stevens, who was the archetype for the little drummer girl of John le Carre. There's a footnote in And the Rest is History about that. It's kind of interesting. So. After that, we were taken up and tortured. I describe how that happens in the book, especially the bastonade, which is on the feet. And I was taken back down into the cell. Unbelievable pain like I've never experienced before. Whenever I go to the doctor, Shoshana, they ask you pain on 1 to 10. I say, I got a problem with that because for me, the threshold is 10 is pretty high. And so this is really only a 2. And most people, it might be a 6. But it was awful. It was unbelievable pain. And in my pain, I had a vision of Jesus in the cell, in the dark underground cell, with his head, the crown of thorns, and the blood streaming down his face. And he said to me, what you are enduring is nothing compared to what I suffered for you. And it just blew me away. It blew me away. And that was the beginning of a transformation which continues to this day because that is still present with me. I still feel that. I can still feel his presence today after 40 years later from that moment. So that was the beginning of taking me to the other direction after I was released by the grace of God and only by the grace of God. I went both back to Lebanon the next year and also to Israel. I spent a lot of time in Israel, a lot of time in the West Bank at that point in Ramallah. I stayed with another journalist for a couple of weeks in Ramallah, trying to meet some of these Palestinians who had held me hostage. And it was quite an eerie experience. And bit by bit over the years, I began to understand that, actually, it was actually still in the cell when we were waiting for the Israeli tanks to come and burst down the walls of our underground prison. So that's when I began to understand about Israel, that Israel was actually the liberator here, and that what the Palestinians had done was take the entire city of Beirut hostage. It wasn't just me and the other people with me. It was the entire city they took hostage. And guess what? That's what they still do today. They have not changed their MO. That's what Hamas was doing in Gaza. They took the whole city of the territory of Gaza hostage just so they could, carry out their or attempt to carry out the genocide of the Jewish people, which is their ultimate goal. So anyhow, that's kind of how I began and where I went after. The rest is history. There's book 2 of the Timmerman trilogy, which is the Iran House, tales of revolution, persecution of Christians in Iraq in particular, war and intrigue. And it's a lot of my reporting stories, but it ends up with a very unusual story of working for the U.S. intelligence community during Trump 1 on the Iran target. I was running a network of Iranian subagents who gave us information. In particular, that's where the book, kind of the culminating point of the book, where about the attempt by the Iranian regime to take the U.S. embassy Baghdad, to capture the U.S. embassy and to take U.S. diplomats hostage over the New Year's holiday 2019-2020. And as I learned later on, again, as in the book, they were being prompted to do this by a senior advisor to then former Vice President Joe Biden. And there were electronic communications between the Iranian foreign minister, Javad Zarif, and this unnamed foreign policy advisor who, as I said in the book, is still in the White House today, because the book was published when Biden was in the White House. And that advisor was encouraging the Iranians to take the U.S. embassy hostage, to capture the U.S. embassy. My network of subagents helped to inform President Trump what was going on, and ultimately led to his decision to take out Qasem Soleimani. So, as I say in the book, if I had one grain of sand that in the balance that helped him make that decision, I'm very proud and glad that I did.
As
Uh,
he should be.
yeah. And by the way, he actually recognized me at a campaign event in Florida that September, and he said, "There's somebody out here in this audience," and he was looking directly at me, and I know he was because I was sitting next to Matt Gaetz, and he had already introduced Matt Gaetz, so he wasn't looking at Matt. He was looking at me. And there's somebody out here in this. Oh, I can't name him. I wish I could go down there and hug him, but I can't do that. And he said, "Oh, he's been giving us great stuff on Iran, but anyhow, I had got these secret people out there." I thought it was kind of neat.
That's neat.
Yeah.
But step back a second. What were they planning to do with the embassy when they got it? Hold it for ransom or just kill everybody? What was the
Ruin the last year of the Trump presidency the way
ah,
that they did with Jimmy Carter, to hold the diplomats hostage for as long as they possibly could, and to ensure that Joe Biden got elected. It was going to be their October surprise. Uh, okay, it was their October surprise coming over the New Year's holiday. And in fact, they did begin to march with 25,000 people from Karbala on the last day of December. I was down here in Florida on my bike, back and forth on a special communications device that I had with my handler, and I'd be on my bike and call me up. That's why I have to pull over with a bike on. I'm not going to sit there with cars around me. And I said, "Ken, do you have anything new? Do you have anything on this? What are your guys saying?" And so we would go back and forth all that New Year's Eve, right up until the nighttime, when my guys were going to sleep, with new information that was feeding into the White House and feeding into the Situation Room when that decision was ultimately made the next day to take out Qasem Soleimani.
So I have to say to those of you who are listening, I have known Ken Timmerman since, I don't know, a really long time. That's
Mm,
a story I never heard. So
yeah,
thank you for bringing us something.
yeah,
Certainly they've never heard it, but I've never heard it either.
mm,
So
mm,
you've made my day.
yeah.
Um, but let's see if we can get ourselves, we're never on track. I mean, the fact of a conversation with Ken Timmerman, let me
Mm,
just say, is that it does this. But I want to get back on the track of Christian Zionists.
mm,
Um,
mm.
First of all, tell us where Christian Zionism comes from and how that fits with American patriotism. We had some people send in questions, and one of them asked whether um, is there tension between nationalism, American nationalism, and Christianity? And tell us how those things came to you, how you see them, and is there a conflict ever?
I don't see any conflict at all. But so Christian Zionism, Tucker thinks it's a brain virus, and he cites a number of people. Say, oh, these people, they've got brain virus. He even cited Karl Rove, who I don't really think of often as a Christian Zionist, but
Maybe.
anyhow, he said it's a brain virus, and as I said, he doesn't understand the Old Testament prophecies, where this really came into play. There has always been an affinity between America's founders and Israel, and the American Jewish community. I wrote at the end of Preachers of Hate, which is my 2003 book on Muslim anti-Semitism. I wrote the story of Haim Salomon, who is a Philadelphia Jew, a prominent Philadelphia Jew who became an intelligence agent for Washington, but also raised money for the Continental Army that horrible winter of 1776, 1777, when the Continental Congress cut off their funds. And they were there in Valley Forge and in Ringwood,
Right.
barefoot in the snow. And Haim Salomon saved the American Revolution. And Washington was forever not just grateful, but acknowledged that belongingness of the American Jewish community. He wrote his famous letter to the Jews of Newport in 1790, I think it was, under each, as not just about toleration, but how each man will live in peace under his olive tree and with his vine, right, in this new country that we are creating together. So there's an affinity, a striving for freedom. So the American striving for freedom, I think, is the beginning of that relationship between Americans and Jews and Israel, especially the notion of Israel. But where Christian Zionism really began I mean, really becomes powerful, and I'm skipping over, of course, the abolitionist movement and everything else, was in 1948. What happened in 1948? God fulfilled his prophecy in Ezekiel 36 and 37 and brought the Jewish people back to Israel and reestablished the state of Israel. And that is the ultimate foundation of the whole Christian Zionist movement, because there's no other prophecy, we believe, in the Bible to be fulfilled before the end times except the rapture of the church. So God fulfilled his word and his promise to the Jewish people. His
So,
plan for the Jewish people is continuing because he brought them back to the land, gave them the land, and it is theirs forever. And as Christians, our role in this is to recognize that and to support Israel and to remember, he who blesses Israel is by God, he who curses Israel, Tucker Carlson, is cursed by God.
so this
And
is where
what we believe.
Carlson can't get there, because if he's
Right,
not going to look at the Old Testament, he's
right,
not going to understand God's promise,
right,
and therefore is not going to understand the importance of the reestablishment of the
right.
state of Israel.
Right, right, right. Exactly right. So this is in so Ezekiel, here we go. Ezekiel 35:24. For I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries and bring you into your own land. Verse 28, you shall dwell in the land which I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God. And by the way, he doesn't do it for their sake, but so the nations will know that he is God and that he is all powerful. And that's another thing that's very important. But that now we get into preaching of one sort or another. Yeah.
We can do a little preaching, not too much. But what you end up with, if you look at the founding fathers and their appreciation of the Jewish community, and
Mm,
you look at the reestablishment of the state of Israel a couple
mm,
hundred years later,
mm.
and the importance of that, so then you begin to understand Christian affinity, not only for the state of Israel, which is much appreciated, but also for our own country,
Right,
because it establishes our country as a country of laws and a country of freedom for all people, and that includes Christians.
right, right.
And the founding fathers,
Yeah.
in many cases, were not so much Christians as they were
Mm.
deists, but for
In
them
many
it
cases,
didn't
right,
matter, because
right,
the Christians and the Jews and anybody else who got here
right,
could be here.
right.
So is that what informs your American patriotism?
Absolutely. And just one other detail here. Harry Truman. Harry Truman was a deeply committed Christian. He read the Bible frequently. I don't know who his teacher was, but I know that he had one.
Right.
And he understood the role of Israel. And when he saw the state of Israel being recreated, he understood immediately that this was the fulfillment of God's promise, a prophecy. And Truman was the first to recognize the state of Israel. Remember, the United States at the UN was the first to recognize the state of, within minutes of the proclamation.
Right.
And he did his best to convince others, including the Soviet Union, believe it or not. So there have been American leaders, Ronald Reagan is another one of them, who believe in the importance not just of the state of Israel, but the importance of Israel to America. And spiritually, the spiritual importance, but also the increasingly the national security importance. So that's I set that almost to the side because we have allies, and that's a secular relationship. And to me, in a way, it's almost the spiritual relationship that is most. It is the spiritual relationship that's most important. But if you want to get into the secular side
I
of it,
do. I
yeah,
do. Yes.
Israel is an ally unlike any other, certainly unlike France or Britain or Germany or Belgium, for that
Yes,
matter,
I think that's right.
Or Saudi Arabia. Israel is an ally unlike others. And in particular, the Israeli intelligence community has shown it has a depth and a reach in human intelligence, in Iran in particular, that goes so far beyond anything that our intelligence agencies can imagine. It's not funny. I mean, the pagers with Hezbollah, the fact that they knew exactly where the Hamas leader was at what time he was in Qatar, in Doha, even though Bibi had to apologize for that later on, or at least say, I didn't really mean to hurt you. I just mean to hurt him. Uh, but what they had in Iran and the intelligence they had on the Iranian nuclear program, the leaders of the program, the military leaders of the program, they got them all on the first night. There were about a dozen people who blew up in their cars or at homes in their bed. Unbelievable human intelligence. The theft of the nuclear archive. I mean, that has got to be the intelligence coup of all times. Uh, Unbelievable stuff. They not only located where it was, they had 4 hours to crack 26 safes and to know which of the four they were actually going to break into that had the stuff that they wanted, get the material out into a couple, 500 boxes in panel trucks, and after that, we don't know how they got out, but they got out and nobody knew. Nobody knew anything.
So did you know that there's a meeting in Israel this week of a wide variety of military experts from around the world, including countries that have said they're not going to talk to Israel, they're not going to participate with Israel, including, UK and the US, well, the US being on the good side. But a whole bunch of them are there to learn the lessons that Israel learned in Gaza. And I find it amazing that when you get to push and shove and you talk about security issues, they can say what they say about Israel, and I don't like it, but they say it. But when it comes down to it, they want to learn. And I think that means that Israel is, in fact, not only an ally for the United States, but an ally for our allies.
Yeah, yeah. As well, that's a good point. And you see how the Israeli Air Force in particular has been so incredibly precise in their targeting. It's remarkable. I mean, even 40 years ago when I was in Beirut. So I get released. I go back to Israel. I took part in a briefing by I think it was Ronan Gisson, who was the IDF spokesman at the time in late '82,
Right.
and Tom Friedman of the New York Times, who is I will not qualify
Oh,
him,
no,
but let's just say
don't, please don't, please don't.
let's just
I
say,
don't
as my
want those
father
words
said, if
on
you
my
have
program.
you have
Thank
nothing
you.
good to say about a person, don't say anything. So I will not say anything. The Friedman says, oh, it was indiscriminate bombing of West Beirut. You were targeting civilians and all the rest. He says, well, excuse me. Here, let me show you these bomb damage assessment photos that we took over the sports stadium. You see, all of our bombs landed within 100 meters of the sports stadium because that's where the Palestinians had all of their AAA artillery. And I kind of raised my hand in the back. I say, Colonel, I can actually attest to that because I was within that 100-meter radius and we were getting bombed day and night.
I didn't know that. You were in the,
We
yeah,
were in the
maybe I
radius.
did know that. You were in the radius.
We were
Yeah.
in the radius. And when I went into that building, it was eight stories, a Mediterranean building with, and we were in the cellar. When I got out, it was 1 floor and a half and pancakes,
Wow.
which is why I say I got out by the grace of God.
I think there's no other way out. That's it. That's the way out.
Yeah.
Can we turn back to the United States and what's going on here? So we see it when we've been watching for a long time, Antifa and BLM and the Muslim Brotherhood and all this left wing, what they call left wing intersectionalism. But at the same time, they were saying, no, no, we don't have any problem. We're fine. Jews can give us money. Jews can vote for us.
Mm,
We're all great.
mm,
Now you get to the emergence of right wing anti-Semitism. You want to talk a little bit about how conservatives have responded to this emergence of a very unpleasant and dangerous ideology?
yeah. So Kevin Roberts is the person that everybody is
Yeah,
talking about, the president of the Heritage Foundation. I have withdrawn my contributions. I know a lot of people have stepped down. Stephen Moore, who's a good friend, has
great
left
guy.
has left Heritage, and a whole bunch of other people have left. Every rabbi who was on their anti-Semitism committee has left, I think. And Kevin Roberts came out. I mean, everybody knows the story. Came out, a couple of weeks after Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on his show, and said, "Well, Tucker's a personal friend, and he's going to remain a personal friend, and this is not really that serious, and we don't take that. He just papered over the whole thing." And you can't do that. You cannot do that. We cannot do that as the MAGA movement, as conservatives, as Republicans, as Americans. We cannot paper over anti-Semitism because we know where it leads. We know exactly where it leads. The kind of comments that Tucker is making and that Candace Owens are making is exactly the type of things that were being made in Germany in the 1920s and the 1930s. And we didn't know at the time where it led. We should have. but we didn't know at the time where it led. And we can't allow that in our movement.
But it's there. Now tell us who it appeals to. Like,
Um,
obviously, not you,
yeah.
and probably not most Christians in this country, but
Mm.
it's getting resonance someplace. Who's listening?
I think it gets resonance with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I remember when she first ran for Congress, I said, "Oh my God, do we really have this woman as our nominee?" Because she was thicker than whale dung. She was not smart. Now, I will give her credit. She has gotten much better in her public speaking in the years since she's been in Congress, but she's still not smart. And she does not understand national security. She does not understand the role that Israel plays in our national security. And she is also, for whatever personal reasons I do not understand, she is susceptible to this virus of anti-Semitism. Let's blame it on the Jews. Let's blame this on Israel. Israel's leading us here. Israel is leading us there. We don't need Israel. Aid to Israel is not a good thing, and we have other things to spend money on. By the way, that's a whole separate issue that which we can actually
Yes.
discuss
Yes.
because Israel might do better not having aid from the United States for its own reasons, for completely different reasons, but no, not those reasons. And so there are people like her, the uneducated, I would say, those who are in some kind of spiritual limbo or who have bought into this replacement theology. And there are people, there, Protestant churches, the Episcopal Church has become an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel church. The
Really?
Presbyterian Church has become an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel church by their own proclamations, by their own proclamations. Now, President Trump has been wise enough to surround himself with evangelical pastors who are profoundly pro-Israel, who are of the cut of Christians United for Israel, CUFI, and groups like that. And he's been very wise to do that and unwavering in his approach. So I'm not worried about President Trump, and I'm not worried about just about everybody in his government today. But there are folks, I would say, on those who are conspiracy minded.
Mhm.
I have always been wary of conspiracies because the world is a pretty weird place anyway. I mean, facts can lead you to some pretty strange truths, but those truths aren't conspiracy, they're facts.
Mhm.
Conspiracies are when you put together disparate facts that have nothing that are unrelated, and you come up with, 2 plus 2 equals 16. And that's what they're doing. I think those are the people who are either rationally impaired or spiritually impaired.
Okay, you said something else that I think was very important. You said people looking to blame somebody, and so they blame the Jews, and
Yeah,
Marjorie Taylor Greene being one of those.
right.
Um, is that a reason that young people might be susceptible? Things are not going for a lot of American young people
Mm,
exactly the way they thought they would. Home ownership is difficult.
mm,
Student loans are difficult. Jobs are not the jobs they thought they were going to have. There's
mm.
a lot of sort of angst in
Yeah.
American young people today. And
Mm,
our kids, yours and mine, I think are both a little bit older than that
right.
and more settled than that. But
Mm,
if you look at that,
mm.
is that not a target audience for people who want to blame someone? And the obvious candidate is Jews because the anti-Semites say they have money and say they have power and say they run things and they have Marjorie Taylor Greene said we have space lasers. I'd love to see those.
Right.
Are young people especially susceptible?
I think that's a good point. And if they are, I think the primary reason is because they are being indoctrinated by left-wing anti-Semitic professors in college and universities.
Okay.
Whereas when I was that age, the professors were not left-wing anti-Semites. They weren't necessarily conservatives, but they were certainly not anti-Israel the way so much of the academic world in the United States is today.
So that talks directly to those young people.
I think so.
Um,
And so there's no check. So if they fall into a conspiracy, into conspiracy theory, there's no checking them. They've got the Noam Chomsky's. I don't want to lay everything on him, but he's too
why
old to
not?
matter now anyway. Sorry. but he is. But they've got the Noam Chomsky's and his spawn, who are there to brainwash these kids or encourage them in their anti-Semitic beliefs.
Okay, so that goes to the people who go to college. How about
Mm,
the guys that don't, guys and women who don't? Although, interestingly, someone wrote in a question
mm,
suggesting that right-wing anti-Semitism is a much more male phenomenon, and left-wing anti-Semitism has many more females in it.
mm,
And I think if you look at the intersectional groups and the
mm.
role of people like Linda Sarsour, that's probably true. But anyway, um, for those who don't go to college, what's the role of social media in all of this? How does that?
Well, I think, Facebook, for starters, along with the iPhone, have got to be two of the worst inventions ever created by
Yeah.
mankind and have done more harm, certainly more harm than good. And they encourage people Facebook is an echo chamber, a giant echo chamber. And so you put out, Twitter's the same way. You put out some outrageous belief, and there are always people out there who are going to like it and are going to push it forward, and you will have an audience. And I've seen this, even as a investigative reporter, when it was still an honorable profession, and as a commentator, people around me who were far more successful than I was because they were shouting all the time, and they were exciting people's emotions. And I didn't like to do that. I didn't like to do that as a political candidate when I ran for Congress, and I saw people who were running for other positions next to me who were doing the same thing, some of them today in high positions of power. And I saw them
Indeed.
appealing to emotion, um, and I don't think that's healthy. So I think that's part of it as well. It's this emotionalism, and you can prey on people's emotions very easily.
An echo chamberism. And then you find out how much money the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians are spending on bots filling up social media
Right,
space, which then infects
right,
our kids and not just our kids, but the adults also. So
right.
there's a lot of stuff out there that would encourage these bad tendencies. And there's always been that things. I think social media is more destructive than anything
I-
you and I had when we were teenagers or young adults. How
mm.
do you fight back?
That's a good question, and that's one that goes beyond me. I mean, I don't pretend to understand social media. I don't like it. I don't understand it. I haven't mastered it. I haven't been able to use it to my benefit. And so, as far as I'm concerned, you can just shut them all down, and I'd be happy. But that's not an answer.
No, it's not. No, but I mean in the larger sense of things. Look, again, question from a listener.
Mm,
Um, the far left tends to do things in person. They shut down highways. They make things on college campuses. They demonstrate in cities and in airports and in Europe, increasingly in soccer fields in Europe.
right. Mm,
Um, the right doesn't really do those kinds of demonstrations. And I think that may be because that branch of the right is much smaller. But
mm.
how do you go after people who disrupt our society in the name of things that are bad for our society? Anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism, a lot of it. Where
How
do
do
we
you like
go?
how about the New York Muslims who take their prayer rugs on Fifth Avenue and try to block traffic, or go down to Wall Street and try to block traffic, and you say, oh, well, we can't touch them because of freedom of religion and all the rest. Look, we have laws on the books, and what we need are leaders who are courageous enough to enforce the laws on the books. We learned that in spades on January 21st, 2025, when all of a sudden we had a president who enforced the immigration laws. And guess what happened? The illegal crossings at the border went down to zero in a matter of weeks. He didn't need legislation. He didn't need new authorities. He didn't need anything else. You needed a president to tell law enforcement to enforce the laws. And we did. So many of these demonstrations that you're talking about are happening where? In sanctuary cities. They're taking place in bastions of the left. I don't see many of them here in Florida, and I'm not sure how well they would go over here in Florida, but or in Texas, or in Utah. Although other things have happened in Utah recently. But seriously, you need to enforce the laws, and the laws are clear. The laws are clear. There's a very clear separation between the right to protest and the right to free speech, and crying fire in the theater, in the crowded theater, or crying kill the Jews. It's the same thing. Crying kill the Jews, which they do, is the same as you know shouting fire in a crowded theater.
So, so we don't need new things necessarily. We need
No.
to pay attention to the laws we have
Yeah.
and make other people pay attention.
Right. And then okay, social media, we have people on the right who are very Charlie Kirk was tremendously
Yes.
successful at social media, and his widow Erica Kirk is tremendously successful. And so I look to those people who have mastered social media to combat the anti-Semitism that we see on the right from people like Tucker Carlson. And I hope they will. And I really hope that that Kevin Roberts and the Heritage Board, especially the Heritage Board, they understand that their survival is now on the line because of the
Right.
stupidity. And I think he was just stupid. I don't think he was evil intentioned, although he could have been, but I doubt that. The the stupidity of the president of the Heritage Foundation. He's ruining that organization that I was friends with Paul Weyrich for many years until his death and worked with him. And Paul was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. He would be aghast to see to have heard Kevin Roberts say what he said about Tucker Carlson.
Let's go back to something else you said, because you were talking about our laws and people who don't obey them and have demonstrations in the middle of streets, and you mentioned Muslims with prayer rugs,
Very broad.
not as if they don't have mosques in which they can pray. Okay.
All right.
There seems to be, and I see it for sure on the left, and I think I see it on the right as well. Somebody wrote in and asked, where is the protest against Muslim terrorism against Christians in
Mm,
Africa?
mm,
It's
mm.
it's a huge problem. It's an enormous, not only do they kill people, but they've created famine, and they've created serious famine and serious genocide, not the libels that they throw at Israel, but
Right.
but real wreckage.
Yeah.
Why is this not a bigger issue? Or is it a big issue inside the churches of America? Because it isn't a big
It's
issue
okay.
societally.
There are a couple of ugly pieces to this,
Okay.
and one of the ugly pieces to it, and I encountered it, and I tell that story again here in the Iran House. In the story, there's several chapters about northern Iraq where I go to witness to the persecuted church, and am interviewing people who've had their family members murdered and kidnapped by jihadi Muslims, and the ugly piece of it has been the relationship of the Protestant churches, and many of the mainline Protestant churches have taken the view, well, these are Catholics or these are Orthodox. They're not our people. They're not our
Ah,
Christians. So we're not going to defend them. And by the way, there's a certain branch of Protestant thinking that believes that the Catholic Church is heretical, by the way, and is an evil, is a spawn of the devil. And I don't believe that at all. But there
yeah, but
is,
stop there 1 second.
yeah.
Are the Christians in Africa primarily Catholic, to
No,
your
they're not.
knowledge?
They're
They're
Many of them
not.
in Nigeria, they're mostly Anglicans, actually.
Okay.
So there's no excuse. So Nigeria is no excuse.
Okay.
You don't have
Okay.
that excuse of oh well, we're not going to go help them because they're Roman Catholics. You have no excuse at all. Nigeria, you've had 7,000 Christians who've been murdered in the past year, 200,000 in the past 20 years. It is unbelievable ethnic cleansing. Uh, I used a term here, and I it was coined by a very good friend of mine at Christian Solidarity International. Religicide. They're committing religicide. It's not genocide. It is religicide. They're trying to
Yeah.
wipe out Christianity in Nigeria, and up until this past week, President Trump has put Nigeria back on the list of countries of persecution concern, of special concern, which does have implications. It has implications on the leaders, and he's even threatened Nigeria to bring in U.S. troops to protect the Christians and to destroy the terrorist militias. So it has gotten the president's attention, and that's a big deal.
Mhm. Well, I was not aware of the divisions within American Protestantism
Oh
as
yeah.
they look at Africa, because we write about it periodically, and it's just awful. It is
Mm,
awful. We have
mm,
said from the beginning, after
right.
October 7th, 2023, that Israel is not committing genocide. There is no famine in Gaza. We keep screaming it, but you know what? There is famine in the
Right.
world, and it's largely manufactured, and it's manufactured by people who
By
don't like
jihadi Muslims.
by jihadi Muslims.
Right.
Okay, so let's, so say it
Right.
right out loud.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so
And by the
that's a
way, so
really important thing to
I want
know.
to go back just for a second, but I know you got a couple of questions, but more questions. But
What?
again,
I've asked them what?
in this book,
Yes.
Preachers of Hate, which came out in 2003, it was the first book after 9/11 that examined Muslim anti-Semitism. Nobody had written about Robert Spencer hadn't written a book yet at all. All of his books came after this, and I began research on this in 1994 when I went back to Syria and Jordan when Clinton was signing the peace treaty with Jordan, and I sort of tagged along the presidential thing to get back into Syria because I've been banned in Syria for various reasons. And before I went, I talked to Rabbi Abe Cooper at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, who I'd done a lot of work with. I'd done some studies for them on weapons of mass destruction. And he said, Ken, talk to the Muslim preachers when you're there. Talk to them. Ask them about the protocols of the elders of Zion. And I said, Abe, you got to be kidding. Nobody believes in that kind of stuff. I had this European enlightened view. Everybody knows it's just nonsense. They don't believe. He said, Ken, just ask the question. See what they say. Give it a try. So I go to Jordan and talk to the Hamas affiliated people, Muslim brother. Oh, yes, we know all about these protocols. I go to Gaza and say, oh, I've got a copy here on my bookshelf. Let me show you. It is the notes of the meetings of the wise Jewish, the wise Jewish, and they control the media and they control the cinema industry and the banks, and they caused World War II. And oh, yes, I have it right here. I went to meet the Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Ikrama Sabri, in his office. And his office was right near the Western Wall. There was a tiny window. It was in an Ottoman palace. There was a tiny window at the top that gave onto the Western Wall where you could hear Jews praying in Hebrew. And he sat there and said to me, there is not one stone, Yanni, not one stone that is Jewish in the Western Wall. Yeah. And he believed it. And he's telling this to people. And so I, kind of learned, I put all of that into this book because people didn't know it. People didn't know about that. Most reporters, as I did, would have said, well, all of this that we call it's not really anti-Semitism. It's just kind of normal Arab nationalism. They hate Israel because they're rivals with Israel. It's just a thing over territory. It's over land. It's all about land. It is not about land. That's what I learned, and that is the message of this book and much of my writing. It is not about land. It is about ideology. It is about religion. It is about faith. And the Muslims believe, those who follow the Quran, those who follow the Sunnah, the life of Muhammad, those who follow his Hadith, they believe profoundly, deeply, that Jews are the sons of monkeys and pigs, and we Christians are alike unto them. And they hate us equally. They hate us equally.
Because they have to win.
They
So
have to win.
someone sent in a question based on what you said about various Christian denominations
Mm.
being themselves
Anti-Semitic.
not interested in dealing with
Mm.
Muslim anti-Christianity in Africa.
Mm.
The question is, does it follow as Christian or is it political? Are they basing their unwillingness to be involved or their lack of caring on Christian principles? Or are they just being sort of left-wing Americans who would rather curry favor with Muslims than Christians?
That's a good question, and I don't have an easy pat answer for that. I think there's probably a bit of both. There's certainly the left-wing churches. So being anti-Israel is a left-wing cause in America, and by the way, not just in the U.S., it's in
Yes.
Europe as well. You
Yes.
know, I was anti-Israel on the left when I lived in Paris as a kid, because it was the thing everybody was. It was the thing to do. It was just, of course, you're anti-Israel. Israel is an imperialist country. We all know that. So, yeah. So there's some of that.
Yeah.
There's a piece of that. Is it is there refusal to recognize Muslim anti-Semitism or Muslim attacks on Christians? Uh, is there a faith element in them? I think probably less. Probably less. I don't know how you can justify or just turn your eyes to Christians being persecuted by Muslims and say, "Oh, that doesn't concern me," unless you have just zero understanding of the Bible, Old Testament and New. The Apostle Paul, Saint Paul writes that the body of he writes about the body of Christ, and again, I write about that in the Iran House with John Eibner of Christian Solidarity International. We are all part of the body of Christ, and when one member of that body is hurt or is persecuted, we are all hurt. We are all persecuted. When Christians are persecuted in Iraq, we are persecuted here at home, and that is Orthodox Christian belief. So those churches who do not accept it do not understand the teachings of St. Paul, on which much of Christianity is founded, and they don't understand either the teachings of the Old Testament.
So I got two more for you because we're coming to the end. My last question is going to be about good news and positive thinking, right?
Right.
So, but before we get to that, totally separate questions sent in by somebody who's been following your work and John Bolton's work for, I don't know, 150 years or whatever it is, and believes that you guys were right on Iran. So the question is, if today you were to write an article about Iran's hegemonic nuclear and global ambitions, what would you want your readers to know?
Okay. First of all, I have to say one caveat. I would not write it with John Bolton today.
That's
I
okay.
used to consider him a very good friend. He endorsed me when I ran for Congress, and I liked anyhow, John
Okay,
went
we're going to
John's
set
way.
that aside.
Set that aside. And I thank the person who sent in the question. Look, the Iranians haven't given up. They have not given up. But they're going to have a much more difficult time figuring out how to restart their nuclear program. Everything seems to accord with what President Trump said, that he obliterated the program, that the 400 kilograms of highly enriched fuel will bottom of Ford, not move it before the attacks. Everything seems the IAEA has not said anything to the contrary of that. Obviously, they can't access it, but they haven't seen it anywhere else either. They have not seen it anywhere else. So the Iranians are going to have a harder time restarting their program. They will try. And the important thing will be for us in the United States and for Israel to detect it immediately and to mow the grass, hit them immediately. Don't let them think about it. Don't let them even begin. And I think that is going to set a new entry level. This is the entry level of nonproliferation from now on. Ever since the 12-day war, that is our entry level. If you want to belong to the club of non-nuclear nations, that's your entry level. Zero enrichment.
So we're not waiting for the end anymore. We're not waiting for them to get a bomb. We're not waiting to see what the delivery system. Just forget it.
Amen. That's right.
Amen.
Over.
Okay.
It's over.
Great. I love it.
Mm.
Okay, so the program's almost over.
Mm.
And for those who listen periodically or often, I hope, got to end on a high note. Now, there were some high notes in your presentation, but there were some really low notes too.
Right.
End us on a good note.
Well, that's one of them. Iran is one of them. But
There you go.
Here's another one. And you may be a little surprised at this, or some of the people listening will be surprised to hear me cite James Carville as a high note. But James Carville recently, in one of the left-wing TV interviews he gave, said, we as a Democratic Party, we've got to purge our party of this 20% of left-wing wackos, the trans, the anti-Semites, anti-Israel. We got to purge them out of the party. The good news is that he says they're 20% of the Democrats. In the MAGA movement, I don't think they're even 1%. So I don't think they're 1%. I think this is because you have high profile people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. people are saying, wow, this is just taking over the entire right. It is not taking over the entire right. I think we are grounded. I think we are rational. I think the leaders of our movement, you look at Mike Johnson, for example, who is a deeply Christian man, and you can sense his humility, which is kind of unusual in a politician. Our leaders are well grounded and are not going in that direction. And I think they will cut off those people. So that's the good news.
That is great news, and that's a good place for us to stop. Let me say to our listeners, we're off next week. It's Thanksgiving. I wish you a good holiday. Um, we'll be back. I'm not quite sure how we look in December, but keep your eyes open. You will get invitations. And to
Oh,
you,
Shoshana, I have one
yes,
more question. Can we carve the turkey on Thanksgiving
why
between
not?
between Istanbul and I
Oh,
don't
oh, you want
know.
to carve the turkey? Oh God, you know what? I wish you hadn't gone. Now we end on, instead of ending on a positive note, we end on a bad pun.
Sorry.
Nevertheless, Ken Timmerman, thank you for a really important and very enlightening hour. Again, to the listeners, look up Ken's list of books because every single one of those books, first of all, they're great reads. But secondly, you will learn a lot about things that happened in our recent past, things that are happening today. You'll learn about olives in Provence. It's useful, it's interesting. Look up his stuff. And Ken Timmerman, I hope you'll be back again.
Thanks so much, Shoshana. God bless.